Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Just like the sunrise, we gonna let it rain. Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Just like the sunrise, we gonna let it rain.
Hello, my darlings, and happy equinox tomorrow. And welcome to the season of the witch. Tonight, we're going to delve into the world of the supernatural the pastors warned you about in church. Here there be demons, balefire, dark pacts, and pagans. A lot of the secular community are used to dealing primarily with Christians. And one moment. Hello, happy Sunday. A lot of the secular community are used to dealing primarily with Christians and the occasional Muslim. And a lot of us don't know a whole lot about this other huge population of religious people within the European descended world. Collectively, the pagans. The reasons are easy to find. While together their numbers are large, they're not a single group, just a category of assorted polytheists that we created for easy communication. Also, while they do count memberships in the millions worldwide, again, collectively, they are vastly outnumbered by Christians in the European descended parts of the world. Even atheists, agnostics, and pagans together don't have the numbers to meaningfully oppose Christian efforts to take over entire countries. But perhaps the most important, pagans aren't generally up in our faces telling us how we have to live because they have a magic book that says so. So we often don't know much about what they believe and why. For example, we often refer to each other as heathens. Would it surprise you to know that heathen is actually a specific religion rather than a folksy term for non believer? Calling each other heathens is sort of like calling each other Druze or Sikhs or Zoroastrians, but we don't think of it that way because we don't know much about the other religions. That's kind of funny in a way. Many of us have had conversations where we point out some of the many, many, many things Christianity adopted from pre existing pagan religions. But other than those specific things we can beat the Christians over the head with, we've never really bothered to look into much of it. As many of you know, I was a practicing minister for many years. What you may not know is nearly half of my degrees are in various religious studies. I don't know as much as a specialist in any of these specific faiths, of course, but I would like to share some of what I do know with you. There are a lot of things under the umbrella of paganism. We've got New Age paganism, or neo paganism, which, broadly speaking, is what pagans today are actually practicing. Then there are historical paganisms, the traditions of the pre-Christian peoples, like the ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Norse, Celts, and so on. Some people today are trying to reconstruct those ancient faiths to greater or lesser success, depending on what information the Christians destroyed during their millennium of darkness over Europe. Reconstructionists generally accept that there will always be elements of neo-paganism within any faith because the missing parts have to be filled in by something, and the New Age traditions are both what is readily available and what brought most adherents to these reincarnated religions in the first place. I won't go into the lineage of which branch of what spawned whom and in what order, all those begats and things. Though it is interesting to note there are similarities to evolution in these traditions. Certain traits emerge in one group, and like any heritable characteristic, the descendants often carry those traits. So we can trace them all back, like a family tree, to the dawn of the 20th century. Margaret Murray's The Witch Cult in Western Europe, The Golden Bough, and a few other books all peaked in popularity in the 1920s after a couple of generations got to soak up Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, and others that built a fandom focused on the strange and unusual, with a healthy dose of occult dark arts. These foundational influences are why so much of postmodern Satanism and Wicca look so similar. They share many of the same inspirational sparks. In short order, people started forming their own secret cults to venerate mysterious powers, whether dark gods or nature spirits, and in due course, Gerald Gardner started publishing how-to guides that really got things moving. Gardner's version of Wicca is still one of the most popular, though there are others. But Wicca isn't the only way people practice. There are multiple flavors of witchcraft that are distinct from Wicca, capital N neo-paganism, which is sort of a pagan agnosticism or a I'm spiritual but not religious take on the neo-pagan idea of venerating nature, spirits, ancestors, and so forth. Wicca itself comes in a variety of flavors. Some of those favor specific pantheons of gods, Celtic, Greece, Norse, and so forth. That's where the Reconstructionists split off. They decided rather than practice a New Age lip service version of an ancient faith, why not try to rebuild the real thing? Again, success varies, but that may be for the best. I'm not thrilled with the idea of human sacrifices making a comeback. We got quite enough of that under Christian theocratic rule. This is where the heathens come into it, by the way. Heathenry was the term for the ancient Germanic branch of what we call the Norse religion. today's heathens follow a similar track, distinct from the Norse Reconstructionists, the Estaru faith. Asatru. I can never pronounce that one. The Asatru faithful. Norway. Heathens are Germany-ish. But they do have many common elements, like a version of the runes, Odin and Thor, and a lot of that sort of stuff. These are the folks that you'll see wearing Thor's hammer in place of a cross around their necks. Mostly. Other flavors of Wicca and the blur of general neo-paganism tended toward nature worship and branched off in that direction. Sometimes you'll get specific gods pulled out of their faiths and reworked into a modern idealized semi-monotheism, like some sects of Gaia worshippers, for example. Sometimes you'll get pantheists who hold that all of nature is one divine something, or versions that reject gods entirely and uplift spirits, either ancestral or animistic. It splits down even finer from there, but I think you get the point. Pagans aren't even necessarily polytheistic. Some, technically, are atheists. No gods in their beliefs at all. And all of that is just the European stuff. There are traditional religions in other continents, some never fully eradicated by Christian invaders. Folk magic practices like voodoo, and lots of other ways to be pagan. But the point of tonight isn't a history lesson. I just wanted to give you some background to better understand what we're diving into. Next, I'll show you what a ritual actually looks like, performed at a pagan equinox event a couple of years ago. The group running the rite that year happened to be Greek pantheon flavored, but it does change to preserve harmony in the greater community by showing respect to each other sect's specific beliefs. Then we'll take a quick look at a self-owned by a Christian apologist that I found funny and does relate to today's topic, and a pagan apologist will show us that apologetics is just as dishonest in every belief system. Then, the main event. An actual heathen, a polytheist of the neo-heathen tradition, will explain why we're all wrong about everything. Probably. Thank you for joining me. Happy equinox. Oh, and please remember to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed that intro. I took a little while writing it. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all. Thank you for joining me, and happy Sunday and things. As always, this stream will redirect you over to Maya's show at the appropriate time, but we do have a whole bunch of stuff to cover. So hello, everyone. And yeah, I'm gonna, oh my goodness, there's so many, there's so many chats. Yay. Oh goodness. Yeah, I can't keep up. I can't. But yes. Yeah, Deviant says Asatro. It's a hard T like tank. Not so. It's fine. It's fine. Okay, let's get into the things, shall we? Oh, I have to bring the thing up on screen. I have so many buttons to push. I should have practiced my intermittent between things thing, but in any case, we're starting off with the ritual that I myself recorded in 2022 at a pagan pride event for the autumnal equinox, as it happens. If I don't break it. I don't know why it keeps jumping like that. We're set at 1.0 playback speed.
Thank you.
Surprise! We're surrounded by witches. Somebody snuck up behind us. Now, normally they form a circle, but it was very sunny that day, so almost everybody hid over in the shade or up on the hill. There's a big group of people up on that hill, but we works with what we've got. It's still pretty cool. There's somebody like right behind us, and there's our happy little altar. We're not going to go through the whole ritual. That'd be a solid 15 minutes. But I want to give you guys a taste of the flavor.
All right. Okay. Well, we're just going to not do it. And I knocked over Fate. Jack, fix it.
All right, do your speech now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. So autumn is often seen as a time for reflection. When we witness the divine order of the universe pass through its cycle, the time that takes us from the heat and revelry of summer to the rest and order of winter. It is the time we secure our prosperity so we can be at peace during the dark half of the year. For this, we look to the gods of order, Zeus and Athena of the Agora. That is the city center where we entertain, hold meetings and markets, Hermes of the marketplace, and Themis, goddess of justice and divine law. The force with which we weigh all of our witches' art.
Zeus and Athena join Hermes in the marketplace. They watch over our assemblies because this is the time.
I realize the audio isn't super great. I had 2 microphones here and then directly across. You can see it on the little stand on this little table over here, but they kept talking away from either of the microphones. Oh, curses. Tori says, Ember, have you ever considered becoming a teacher? Yes, actually. I've been a teacher before. The pay's not great, and I don't like being in physical schools, but I have done some online teaching. In fact, just a few months ago, I was doing a lot of online teaching. Pluses and minuses.
When we will be congregating together more and more to find comfort in the cold ahead. It is a time when we also make our fortunes off of that which we have harvested, and is a particularly sacred time for merchants of all kinds. We evoke Themis to remember that even though the seasons may be harsh, it is divinely ordained. But she is also here to remind us to respect the natural world, to appreciate its laws and governances, and to hold it sacred.
This is also a time we start to get excited as we enter the season of the witch. We will be conjuring the witch gods to aid us in manifesting prosperity for the coming months. So I'm north.
East.
Yep.
Ready? Hail Euros, wind of the east, lord of autumn, whose season begins. Open now the gates of the rising sun. We summon and stir the watchtower of high.
Okay, that's enough for right now. Y'all get the general idea, I'm sure. If you've ever seen The Craft, it's a lot like that. It's a hail to the guardian of the watchtower and all that sorts of stuff. It's literally by rote, you know. If you want to see the whole video, like I said, it is in VR, but you can view it on a regular thing. I'm dropping the link for that in the chat right now. But it's cool how they go all the way around the circle and do the invocation thing, but it's really long. So I'm just going to leave that there. Yeah, that's my other channel. Well, one of my other channels, Sparklight Studio, where I do the virtual reality time vault things. Most of those are like private events like weddings and whatnot. So they're unlisted and accessible only by the people who contracted me, but a few of them I managed to make public like this. So, you know, if you're interested, I hope you enjoy. But we're going to move along to Michael Knowles, but there's a reason. Now let me make him big. Oh, I don't want to think about making Michael Knowles big.
Steeped in tradition kind of paganism, nature worship, polytheism, that is coming back in a pretty conscious way as well. And the reason for this is that we've kicked Christianity out of the public square. And this has happened not only because of the faithlessness of the...
Okay, now he's going to say a bunch of hateful shit. The reason I brought it up is because paganism, nature worship, and all of that is returning because we've gotten rid of Christianity. And that reminds me so much of what Christopher Hitchens used to say, that if you got rid of Christianity and science would come back exactly the same it'd take maybe 1,000 years, but we would keep making rediscoveries and we would get science back. Christianity would never come back on its own because it's fucking fictional. And Knowles is showing that's what happens, that without Christianity being forced on people, they tend towards nature worship if they want to worship anything at all. It's very peculiar for him to admit that particular point. I mean, he's evil, but he's not stupid. So to just admit that Christianity is so obviously false that if you're not forcing it on people, strangely, nobody gets a magical revelation from the Lord. I don't know. It's very peculiar. But as I said in the intro, Christian apologists are not the only dishonest apologists. Here's a fellow from the Netherlands, Holland, one of those places. And he's going to tell us a line that you've probably heard before.
There are no atheists. Why are there no atheists? Because, my friends, everybody worships something.
Does that sound familiar? There are no atheists because everyone worships something. For, if you're willing to be dishonest enough about what the word worship means, then maybe you could make a case. That's amazing. Now he does go on and he explains. Well, I'll just let him explain.
I've read the Bhagavad Gita lots of times. No, I'm not gonna lie, like 2.5 times probably. But there's lots of sentences that were etched into my heart when I read it. One of the sentences is, "You become what you worship."
You become what you worship. I'm not sure that makes sense in any religion. Like, think about that for a minute. If you worship Allah, do you become Allah? If you worship angels, do you become angels? If you worship the tree spirits, I mean, I suppose you could become a tree spirit if you get buried in the forest or something, but it doesn't follow. It's not even a deepity. It's more like a derpity,
So first you have to, what is it to worship? Because everybody worships something. So what is it to worship? It's something that you give your attention to without ever waning. It's what you constantly give your attention to. That is your God. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's hate. For some people, it's love. For some people, it's sex. For some people, it's alcohol. But
see, if you're willing to define worship broadly enough to the point of actual dishonesty, then everyone worships something. Apologists in every religion, every fucking religion. And again, I did hang out with pagans a lot for many, many years, and generally they're very good people. But being a pagan doesn't mean the apologetics ever get any better. So with that in mind, because we do unfortunately have a relatively short show on our little time together here. And real quick, I will tell everybody we're doing double shows tomorrow morning. We're taking over Chris's channel, the Damn Network, to do Java and Jugs is returning, and then my normal regular scheduled morning show. So make sure you're over at the Damn channel or the Java and Jugs channel or one of the other link channels, because Seize the Means of Production is how we do that thing. But also back here at 11 a.m. because we're doing poly stuff. It could be kinky. We'll see. Also, bunch of stuff coming up. We've got a whole week of shows. The weekend is scheduled. The following week is scheduled. And I actually have a guest the Sunday after the next one. There's a lot coming up. So do make sure you're subscribed. But all that said, we do have a short period of time together today. Because my show happens and we must pay tribute to our actual God. It's weird that we're atheists and we have goddesses, isn't it? But nonetheless, we must pay tribute to our goddess. So let's change the channel here and head on over to our main event, which is an actual heathen, neo-heathen, apologist that some of you may know from various chats around the secular sphere. He used to pop up in a lot of places.
Just as there are many arguments for theism that have existed through the ages, so too is the case for atheism. We have record of atheists existing throughout history. And I've discussed on this channel a few incidences of atheists in history, namely the Viking Age and in the Roman Empire. But it stands to reason that when there is disagreement on the ontology of the gods, among...
It's interesting that a neo-heathen would argue that the Viking Age was a godless one. That's very peculiar.
Those disagreements would likely be a complete disagreement, that there are no gods in the first place. Now, keep in mind that when I'm saying atheist here, I'm referring to the philosophical tradition, not the movement of new atheism popularized by atheists known as the Four Horsemen, which was fueled by a cultural response to 9/11.
That's fair. And, you know, this person, Ocean Keltoy, for anybody who doesn't recognize him by face, he's more of a philosophical sort of person, a kind of a debate bro, if you will. But yeah, I'm not particularly interested in the new atheists and their fame and fortune, despite the fact that, you know, Hitchens did get some really good one-liners from time to time. And speaking of really good one-liners from time to time, My Unfinished Song sends a super chat for 222. Thank you so much. And says, if you want to slide from one thing to another, that's right. You go to adamandeve.com and enter code word Brentley at checkout for 50% off any one item, almost any one item, 6 free movies, 3 free gifts, and free shipping on the whole order. Not sponsored. I just stole the ad because I'm a damn pirate, in addition to being a damned witch. Hooray!
Atheist arguments here, I mean arguments that God or gods do not exist. This is distinct from the often articulated Mott and Bailey approach taken by atheists who ascribe to themselves a lack of belief. This often manifests as making claims against theism or religions. And then, if...
So he's already twisting shit. Now, there are atheists out there who do the Mott and Bailey thing and say, you know, religion is fake, but we're just not convinced. It's true. Some people do. Most of us just straight up say we're not convinced. Although, because we have some intellectual honesty, we will go out of our way to say that there are certain gods that we can be sure do not exist. Like this one, for instance. Because there's mutually contradictory characteristics, impossible things we know from history that never happened, so on and so forth. So we know for sure that God doesn't exist, but we can't honestly say that definitely no gods exist, which is why we're in the philosophy land instead of the what we can demonstrate land, which is always an adventure.
Pressed, retreating to saying that they are simply unconvinced. Atheist arguments, by this understanding of arguing for the proposition that God or gods do not exist, aim to give an argument that either show that God logically cannot exist, or show that the reality that we live in is one that makes claims of deities improbable. So there's two distinct aims that might be...
Okay, those are both fair arguments. If you're going to posit a positive claim and say God does not exist, then, I mean, this God does have logical impossibilities, which is one of the ways we can show that this God can't exist. God is improbable. That's not definitive. It's not as locked down as I would like, but it does have a certain property to it that you can actually demonstrate. For example, people frequently say something to the effect of, we see life only in places where life is possible. The fact that life is possible naturally and requires no supernatural explanation, and that we don't see life in anywhere that would require a supernatural explanation, means that God is at best improbable, because there's no sign of it doing anything anywhere. Just as one, for instance.
Taking place with these arguments. Often, the argument is aiming at a particular deity, and traditionally, atheism has largely existed as a counter-tradition, responding to the popular theistic arguments of the day, and as a result, many of them are tailored for monotheistic traditions, making...
Right, like I said in the beginning, a lot of us don't know much about what pagans think because we're dealing specifically with the people attacking us. we're not really out. Some of us are out to end all religions, but we're not really out to end all religions. I mean, me personally, I would like to help people get free of those controlling and harmful cults and traditions, purity culture, that sort of thing. I believe they're harmful, but I'm not going to force anyone to give up religion the same way the fundamentalists want to try to force all of us to be religious. But that's a different topic for a different day. The point is, we tend to be concerned with the religions that are an active threat.
How they affect polytheism, an interesting conversation. I'll point out that a lot of atheistic arguments have to do with criticism of the texts related to religions themselves. Usually these arguments have to do with a contradiction that is expressed within the text, or a discrepancy between the text and our understanding of reality. A common example of this would be something like a contradiction between the Genesis account and the formation of the universe and our planet. Things like pointing out that the Bible's account suggests that plants predate the sun and the moon, or any myriad of objections to young earth creationism.
Right, that's one way to rule out biblical literalism, that particular creation story. There's a few other ways to do that. The fact we know from geological evidence there was no global flood, lots and lots of stuff. But that doesn't completely nail down Christianity, because there are Christians who just go, oh, well, it's just mythology. But the Jesus part, that's what's important. Even though, as Ken Ham points out, and I really, really hate to agree with Ken Ham, if you don't have a literal Adam and Eve committing a literal original sin, then you don't need a literal Jesus. But what you do need is Kelly King, the atheist queen of Detroit, who sends a super chat for $4.99. Thank you so much, Kelly. And says, get your Jose. Your Jose. I'm alliterating early. Get your dose of Java and Jugs tomorrow. We have plenty of both to go around. And we sure do. I don't know specifically who's going to be able to make it. As always, just like with Hot Topic, it's a whoever can and wants to. I will be there. I presume Kelly will be there. Ryan will be there. And I believe AJ and Lil are going to try to make it. And maybe everybody will make it. I don't know. We'll see. It'll be a surprise for all of us.
Kind of arguments often depend heavily on what I like to call mythic literalism, that these religious texts are to be interpreted literally and understood to exist without errancy. Generally, this is unique to a subset within the various monotheist traditions, and is a position that many Christians, for example, don't even...
Well, hold on. Now he's kind of sidetracking it to say mythic literalism is a problem specifically for Christians and other monotheists, and that's not true. There are a Satru, I may have the Norse, the actual Norway Norse reconstructionists. There is a group of literalists within them who believe that Odin literally killed the freaking big old frost giant guy. I forget his name off the top of my head, but it's not important. The world is made out of his corpse. That Odin literally killed the giant and made the world out of its corpse. Now, well, okay, they say they believe. Far be it from me to question whether somebody actually believes something, but from hanging around with pagans for many, 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 many years, it's a fair bet that most of them know they're just playing make-believe. Although there may be a few crazy people. I don't know. But what I do know is that Jester sent a super chat for $2. Thank you so much, Jester. And says, less judgment, more of what the jugs meant. That sounds wise. I'll allow it. Yeah. And meanwhile, people are informing me the monster, the giant of giants was called Ymir. Yes, Frank the Frost Giant. That's correct, Jedi. Yes. Oops, I clicked the wrong one. Oh my goodness. I just wrote up that story too as a possible thing for Dr. Ben's Holy Spirits. We ended up going with a different myth, but I wrote the myth, but meat brain, Anyhow, mythic literalism.
And hold. So these arguments only go so far as disproving a god as it exists under this particular set of beliefs. These kind of beliefs are not as common among modern polytheists who tend to avoid mythic literalist interpretations of their traditions. Personally,
yeah, that's fair. I mean, again, we're speaking in generalities, but most polytheists today tend to avoid literalism because they know there are no gods on Mount Olympus, and the world isn't made of blood and bones, and so on. And so, like, it's demonstrable that these myths are legendary. And we know from the Celtic reconstructionists that the majority of the gods in at least that pantheon, and quite possibly all the rest of them, were once mortals who got legendified over the years and generations, like Bran, Bronwyn, Bridget, and probably gods whose names don't start with the letter B, were all mortals at one point.
I find that heathens who hold to mythic literalism to be few and far between. I won't go so far as to say they don't exist, as I've encountered a few of them, but they're so exceptionally rare and get significant pushback whenever they show themselves. For example, the concept of the Earth being formed out of a Jotun's skull is a little far-fetched, to say the least. However, the conception of the universe as assembled from the body...
In fairness, the Earth isn't made from a skull. According to that particular tradition, whether the Germanic flavor, the Norse flavor, it's... Ymir's skull makes up the cosmos. It's his body but not important. It's just, the reason the cosmos looks like a dome from Earth is because it's the inside of a skull. But it's not important.
Of a defeated deity can lead to an interesting discussion, looking at the spirit of the text rather than the letter of its descriptions. And from the perspective of heathenry, it's hard to defend the idea that the texts are divinely inspired and wholly true from start to finish in the first place. The records that we use were not written by practitioners of the faith. There's a variety of authors, including Christians, Muslims, and Romans, but no heathens. And they have numerous areas of conflict due to the reality of diversity among...
That's partially true. In fact, I'll even say mostly true, because it was the Romans and others, imperial sorts, whether Christians or successors, etc., who did what we now recognize as writing. The early Germanic peoples did have writing, kind of, but the runes, while they could be used as an alphabet, that wasn't really what they were for. And the meaning of the Germanic flavors of runes are hard to ascertain. I mean, hell, it's hard to ascertain the Norse version of the Norse runes. And that's where they're most well recorded. The meanings seem to differ a little bit as you get into Germany and France and the Netherlands and England. And the further you deviate, the more it's been improvised, shall we say.
Historical traditions within heathenry. And this diversity in tradition is something that heathens tend to see as a strength, not a weakness. So mythic literalism not only results in claims that do not reflect reality, but it results in conflicting, absurd, or just plain vague descriptions of whatever that reality would be. So having a mythic literalist interpretation of heathenry, it just doesn't make any sense, which is likely why it's so rare.
I agree that having a literal interpretation of the myths doesn't make any sense, which is why it's rare. But that's broadly true of the rest of the belief system, too. Like, if you think the mythology is not literal, I have to wonder if you think the gods are literal. Because if you don't think the gods are literal, then you're not really practicing a religion in the way it's normally understood. It's more a kind of somewhere between a lifestyle and a dedicated path in the flavor of atheistic Buddhism. If you do think it's real, then that also doesn't make much sense. I don't know. I'm not sure how much he'll get into his own beliefs so much as try to counter apologetics by poking hole in the fact that most of our stuff is focused on monotheistic religions. But I digress. Instead, I'll tangent, because Dan D says, I have informed my neighbor about your show, Ember, and Hivesci. She's transitioning and has top surgery on October 1st. Fucking cool. She's a Christian, but hey, so was I once. You know what? We can support our trans sisters, even if they're still stuck in a cult of some kind. It's all good. It's all good.
Most heathens seem to recognize that they're learning about history through historical texts with varying degrees of reliability. We're peeking into the past through the windows that we have, and there isn't much opportunity to even have a mythic literalist narrative in the first place. We're used to dealing with wave after wave of unknowns when looking for specifics, or even being met with the opposite, a variety of deferring answers. As a result, atheistic arguments appealing to a mythic literalist interpretation of these various texts do not land very well with polytheists, as we are, by and large, not mythic literalists. This even
And also, there's the whole diversity thing. Like, if you bring up an argument about the fact that the universe isn't made out of the body of a giant frost giant named Ember, and the cosmos isn't his skull, the Celtic Reconstructionists will just go, yeah, we know. Like, it's not very effective because there's such a vast diversity of beliefs. They could just shrug and be like, whatevs. But you know what is an absolute and demonstrable fact? A super chat from Left-Handed Jedi, who sends $5. Thank you so much, Jedi. And says, on my flight to Ireland many moons ago, I ran across a guy that was researching whether the Owan markings on steading stones might be preserved songs. That is a fascinating subject. So I learned a little bit about Owan, which I'm probably mispronouncing because I've never heard it pronounced by a Gaelic speaker. It's only been like neo-pagans who try to say it and whatever. I learned a little bit about it because I hung out with so many pagans, especially of the Celtic Reconstructionist tradition. They all wanted certain phrases and shit transcribed into Owan markings. And they could like translate the terms from English into Gaelic, but they couldn't turn the Gaelic letters into Owan markings. I can. So I was able to they'd take their phrase, turn it into Gaelic, and then I'd take the Gaelic written in, Latin letters and turn it into Owan letters. And then they could like get their tattoos or whatever. So it's pretty neat. But there's a lot to be said about the possibility that they're preserved songs or at least melodies, because a lot of them seem to have some kind of harmonic to them. I can't really explain it very well, but to look at it, it looks like a song, the way it repeats, and there seems to be a set tempo. And I'm sure you heard a lot more about it than that from the person you were on the flight with. But yeah, there's something to that. It's pretty neat.
Bears out in a historical analysis. In Cicero's text on the nature of the gods, he describes polytheists in dialogue with one another, discussing the gods and how they are seen by different schools of philosophy in ancient Rome. None of them describe what could be called mythic literalism, so it seems that even those in antiquity were well aware that a mythic literalist interpretation was not the way to go.
Right. Many of the philosophers back in the day, well, they were philosophers rather than priests. The priests might have been literalists, but the philosophers were trying to find the kernels of truth. And it seemed likely that a lot of these ancient stories, like the thing about, Zeus playing dice with the universe over who would get to be the god of the sky versus the god of the underworld versus the god of the sea and the storms and whatnot, they threw dice for it. There was a moral lesson about the way the gods choose to organize the universe. There's a chaotic element to it because the gods are very reckless. It's almost a moral lesson set in a philosophical framework with mythology plastered over it to make it more palatable to people. But the philosophers didn't think that's literal history, So yeah. But what is literal history, very recent history, is Jester sends a $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Jester. And says, anyway, Nil sacrificed themselves to create the creator gods. But the gods were lazy and only made Lisa. But Lisa wasn't made of sacrifice, so couldn't be a creator god to do what she was asked. So she got frustrated and ate them. And then we all know where the story goes from here. Lisa, the rainbow giraffe, leaf be upon her, devoured every single creator god, and then pooped out the universe. And it was good. Thank you, Jester.
Mythic literalism interpretations are largely restricted to creationists, and not really that many others. So criticisms of religion that rely on mythic literalism interpretations apply only within the bounds of those that adhere to such interpretations. And to all others, the criticism becomes a straw man, even to those traditions that have a comparatively high population of mythic literalists. The Genesis criticism that I offered earlier might work on a creationist, but it wouldn't work very well on a Christian who isn't a creationist.
Yes and no. First of all, it doesn't work very well on a creationist because they're not really interested in facts or reasoning, because that story is at the core of their identity. You can't reason a person out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. It does work somewhat on more general flavored Christians, because most of the general flavored Christians haven't really thought about what it is they believe. So even though they have this general idea that the flood myth is a myth, once you point out that it did not happen, it sometimes makes them start to ask questions. When you point out that there was no Exodus, that makes them ask a few more questions. And when you start pointing at the moral horrors of the conquest, it makes them ask a lot of questions. And by the time you get to Jesus, you may have triggered a deconstruction event. So even though they aren't strictly bound to those beliefs, because they're less fanatical, they're also often more open to learning new things because they're less fanatical, you know?
And since broadly polytheists do not adhere to such interpretations, we can dismiss this kind of objection fairly easily. Next, I want to look at the appeal to simplicity, because I think it's the strongest one, and it's the one that most affects polytheism.
I take issue with the slight mischaracterization here, the appeal to simplicity. I mean, you could, it's almost a fallacy being described that way. Appeal to authority, appeal to simplicity, right? But also, Occam's razor is more like the law of parsimony. You know, don't needlessly multiply entities, rather than this elementary school version of the idea where the simplest idea is more likely to be the true one. And also the likelihood thing bugs the shit out of me. This is just because a thing is likely doesn't mean it's more true. Unlikely things winning the lottery is unlikely, but somebody wins every single day. And you know what else is sort of like winning the lottery? I can't win them all, folks. But Deviant Outcast sends a super chat for 200 secs, which I very much appreciate. It's probably my favorite currency to announce on a live stream. But Deviant says, and thank you so much. Fun fact, you can't be a Norse literalist, because we weren't in historical times yet and didn't write down our myths. I mean, that is, if you take the word literally. What are we doing? I've confused myself. I do that to me sometimes too. But yeah, that's a pretty good point. There are some old rune stones that seem to describe some of the oldest myths, but the vast majority of them were oral tradition. And it wasn't until the people with the Latin influence, with the scribes, came and started writing stuff down, and who knows how much they changed. And then there's translations and transmission errors and who the fuck knows what. It gets kind of crazy.
As well as monotheism, so it's absolutely worth discussing. Now, the thrust of the argument is that naturalism is a far simpler explanation of reality, as it requires less assumptions than other explanations of reality. And
right, like Laplace said, we have no need of God in the hypothesis. The model works just fine without supernatural nonsense. That's not necessarily the basis of naturalism, but it's a pretty bloody good reason to lean in that direction, if nothing else.
We should have a preference for explanations of reality that require fewer assumptions. This leans on a concept commonly known as Occam's razor, which is that the explanation with the least number of assumptions, that is, the simpler explanation, should be preferred. Now,
I appreciate how he says should be preferred, because that leads us towards a tentative conclusion rather than the probability is on the side, so let's just call it true, which is a mistake. But saying preferring it, meaning you tentatively lean in that direction, I can kind of get down with it. But that's still not quite how Occam's razor works, but details.
There's nothing actually unreasonable about this. This is one of the reasons why many modern atheist philosophers land on atheism. They justify this by saying Occam's razor gives us reason to consider naturalism to be the result of an inference to the best explanation. The responses to this usually utilize a cumulative case of all of the arguments in favor of theism, ranging from logical arguments to appeal to experience and so on.
Inference to the best explanation is another one that apologists tend to misuse. It's the idea that you come up with what seems to you as a reasonable, rational person based on evidence and everything you can deduce, induce, or abduce, what seems to be the best explanation. And then you make an inference. You lean in that direction. A lot of modern philosophers and virtually all modern apologists seem to try to treat that as a conclusion when it is, in fact, an inference. It's right in the name. Then you take your inference, aka hypothesis, and try to make predictions with it. And then you test those predictions in order to see if the thing can be demonstrated to be true or false. Usually false. But the inference alone is only the first step. But that's the only step so many apologists take.
This will be used to show that even if naturalism is simpler, it doesn't necessarily need to be preferred as a result. This response could be used by either a monotheist or a polytheist, but I think that it works better from polytheists. Something that should be pointed out is that simpler doesn't necessarily mean true, which is articulated by an...
Right. It is, as I was saying earlier, you just because you can arrive at a simpler explanation or any explanation for what you consider to be sufficient reason doesn't mean it's true. This is why I'm constantly saying philosophy is really good at ruling out things that are definitely false, but it is not very useful at all for ruling things in, which is why we can only get as far as an inference through most avenues of philosophical discourse.
Objection, which I like to call the appeal to zebra. The term comes from Dr. Theodore Woodward's articulation of the value of Occam's razor in the 1940s and became a medical slang for obscure diagnoses. A version of the example is to imagine that you're walking down the streets of New York and you hear the sound of hoofclops behind you, knowing nothing.
Yeah, this is the whole, if you're in a place where there aren't zebras and you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. And he'll explain that in a minute, but I'm stealing his thunder here for a second to get to a different point. That's not Occam's razor. This is what happens when you oversimplify Occam's razor. Occam's razor, the law of parsimony, is don't unnecessarily multiply entities. If you hear hoofbeats, a proper application of Occam's razor would be to tentatively presume that you have one hooved beast behind you. It doesn't say conclude anything about that hooved beast, but don't presume it's a herd of hooved beasts until you have additional evidence to indicate that direction, shall we say. So by misunderstanding this philosophical concept, we start coming to erroneous conclusions because we're applying the tools incorrectly. It's sort of like trying to shave sideways. You're gonna bleed from it. It's not advisable. But what is advisable is Deviant Outcast sends another super chat for 100 secs this time. Fun fact number 2, Deviant says, and thank you, Deviant. The area of Sweden I'm from and where I lived up until this year is the most runestone rich area in the world. They're everywhere. You're walking around somewhere, boom, runestone. I kind of want to go visit. I kind of want to go visit anyway because the country sounds fucking beautiful. But I would really like to see just like runestones lying all over the damn place. It'd just my archaeology brain would just be buzzing all the time.
Else about your situation, what do you assume is the case? Occam's razor would prefer the simplest explanation. So let's examine the two possible outcomes of animals with hooves that could exist in New York. One would be a horse pulling a carriage, and the other would be a zebra from the zoo. So, how do we go about this analysis? We can examine how one runs into horses and zebras in New York. Zebras are found exclusively in the zoo. Horses, however, are found pulling carriages down the street in a myriad of places around the city. So
that's not necessarily true. There used to be a number of traveling circuses that came through New York City. Granted, they don't today, but that's one possible way one might get zebras. Another is that a rich person's pet zebra gets loose. And also, horses and zebras aren't the only possible options. This isn't truly a dichotomy. I realize it's a hypothetical. I can't help nitpicking when there's bad philosophy at play. It could also be a donkey or a mule or a whole bunch of other things that have hooves of some kind. I'm pretty sure even a cleft hoof critter like a goat or a sheep would make a clippity clop on street, but whatever. I digress.
if one is walking down the street and hears hoof clops behind them, in order to be a horse, one way to explain it is that one of these carriages is behind you. In order to be a zebra, the explanation has to be that one of these zebras escaped the zoo and made its way to your particular location. The zebra requires a few more assumptions, so it's reasonable to conclude that the hoof...
Well, it sounds like there's a few more assumptions, but is it really? Because, like, yes, it's unlikely that if the zebra escapes the zoo, it will come specifically to you. But if the zebra escapes the zoo, it's going to go somewhere. And so its odds of heading in your general direction are just as good as it heading in any other person's general direction, especially considering there's probably more than just you around because it's freaking New York City. Yeah, I mean, it's going to go somewhere.
noises behind you are actually coming from a horse. The point of the analogy is that when making diagnoses, one should prefer the horse over the zebra. Woodward would say, think horses, not zebras. The simpler and more common explanation is often the true one, rather than some rare and exotic disease that is also consistent with the symptoms, even if it may stick out in your mind a little bit more. However,
Carrie Ann points out, zebras don't get shooed. That would definitely change the sound. That's for sure. And also, 43 beavers in a giraffe suit. Absolutely. But also, I used to have a very close person who was a student veterinarian who was going to Africa to learn to study how to treat exotic animals, extra large animals like hippos and so on and so forth. And, you know, I've mentioned her before because she contacted me while she was in Africa to ask about a certain spider bite. Am I going to die? I'm like, you're the vet. Why don't you know? But I digress. Incidentally, it was a yellow sac spider and she was fine. She just had a very unpleasant couple of weeks, but details. She would say, think horses, not zebras. And I said, you're going to Africa. It may be wiser to think zebras. Just throwing that out there.
an important caveat to the analogy is that while most of the time in this situation you might turn around and it's a horse, sometimes it is the zebra. This is, it's largely the premise of the TV show House, in which diagnostician Gregory House seems to be constantly dealing with medical zebras, in part because he...
I'm pretty sure they use that phrase. Maybe it's another one of those medical shows, but whatever. Yeah, I mean, that was House's thing, though. If other doctors who are looking for horses can't figure out what's wrong with you, then you call in a specialist at finding zebras to beat a dead horse of a metaphor.
famously prefers and gets referred particularly difficult cases. In fact, the show's fandom has ranked various episodes on the basis of what they call the zebra factor. A low zebra factor might arise from, say, a common disease in a patient who delayed the diagnosis by lying about their medical history, for example. A higher zebra factor might come from a disease that is so rare that most doctors will just never come into contact with it. So while these medical zebras are rare, they do still exist, and they should be kept in mind until they can be eliminated. The point is, the most parsimonious explanation is not always the fact of the matter, and the history of science has a number of zebras, where a more complicated reality happens to be the fact of the matter, even if it was considered unlikely before it was shown to be true. So, Occam's razor isn't a truth maker, and shouldn't be seen as one. It may be reasonable to prefer the explanation with the least number of assumptions, but sometimes reality is complex.
Right. Again, philosophy is great at ruling out untrue things, not so great at ruling in things, whether they're true or not. It can give you a direction to head. Preferring less assumptions is a starting point, not a conclusion.
means that rather than appealing to simplicity, we should look at the cumulative case of all of the arguments together. And even if it is reasonable to say that naturalism has the advantage in simplicity, that advantage may be meaningless. Polytheism or monotheism may show an advantage in other arguments, perhaps such that the advantage in simplicity doesn't have much weight. This truth enables those arguing for theism to say that simplicity is not necessarily a reason to reject theism, as complexity does not bear out to being false, and simplicity does not bear out to being true. Sometimes the answer is a zebra, or rather, it's sometimes just not the horse. Sometimes it's a dude with 2 empty halves of coconuts, banging them together, brought to New York by a swallow, having gripped it by the husk.
It could be. I appreciate this reference very, very much. I didn't know he didn't include the clip, but I'm honestly, I have to yay every time somebody makes Monty Python references.
Carried by an African swallow.
Another objection to theism as
We're just going to go right to the problem of evil. Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. But yeah, I mean, bravo for references.
Argued by atheists is the famous problem of evil. Now, this comes in 2 forms, and one has more force than the other. And these are the logical and evidentiary problems of evil. The logical problem of evil is credited to Epicurus by Hume through the church father Lactantius, who was likely mistaken about this attribution. Epicureans sometimes get mislabeled as atheists, but they fall more into a polytheist version of deism. Now,
right, because that's kind of where the philosophers landed through much of the classical Hellenistic era. But details. Yeah, the thing of it is, while the problem of evil is a death sentence to a monotheistic religion where the divine being is attributed with the assorted omni properties, which incidentally not depicted in the mythology, but details. If you say your God is omnipotent and omnibenevolent and all the other whatevers, and there's evil, then your God doesn't exist, because these are contradictory to reality. But the dilemma was originally proposed by people who were polytheists. Like, you don't need to have all the omnis in order for the problem to be a problem. It's just not an automatic death sentence in a polytheistic religion. The idea was, why is there evil? And I mean, that's a very valid philosophical question, and the philosophers wrestled with it. They're like, well, why aren't the gods stopping it? And hence the problem of evil. If the gods have the power to stop it, why aren't they stopping it? Unless they're evil, or they don't actually have the power. In either case, why are we worshiping them? For instance, but one thing that we can demonstrate exists in the real world is a super chat from Jester, who sends $5. Thank you, Jester, and says, the safest assumption in the bad analogy is that it's the wild hunt, and you need to get the fuck indoors, which is wise. That brings me back to my teenage years. Just before I left to go to the Navy, I had a partner who was a little on the gullible side, a little easily spooked. And so we went walking one night in the late autumn when it was very dark and all the trees were, unleaved and spooky the way they get after they shed all their leaves and such. And the air was chill and there was a fine mist across the ground and all that vaguely spooky stuff. And so I was telling her about the legends of the wild hunt. Meanwhile, my friends were chucking rocks into the underbrush to make twigs make noises and things, and it freaked her the fuck out. Because I too can be evil sometimes.
Hume quotes Epicurus like this. Epicurus's old questions are still unanswered. Is he, God, willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Well, then whence come evil? This statement has long had some punch, but let's take a look at the argument in a more formal form. I'll throw it up here. Now, taking a look at this argument, premises 1.
Yes, we can't defeat the argument on the surface, so let's syllogize it and see if we can take it apart that way. Friggin' philosophers,
through 5 are fairly agreeable to a monotheist, but a polytheist can get out of this argument immediately by simply disagreeing with premise 1. Traditional
Okay, I don't know if he's actually going to read them. He should have as soon as he brought it up. I'll read them in case you can't see them. Premise 1, if God exists, then God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. So, yeah, that's monotheistic right there. Premise 2, if God is omnipotent, then God has the power to eliminate all evil. Premise 3, if God is omniscient, then God knows when evil exists. Premise 4, if God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. 5, if 5 is evil exists. So 6, if evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil. 7, therefore, God doesn't exist. That's kind of a clunky way to put it, but yeah, that does the job for monotheism. Well, an monotheistic God, but that isn't the only way you can, I mean, like, for example, the God proposed here, he doesn't claim to be those omnis. In fact, this thing claims he creates evil and good both. So there's not even a pretense of trying to be omnibenevolent. So we can rule out the Christian apologist version of God with all the omnis, but the same argument doesn't necessarily quash the God actually described in this book. But I digress.
Polytheism is often described as holding that the gods do not possess the omni traits that are described in this argument, so this premise is easily denied. After that, everything is a straw man, and there's no reason to further engage. But, in fairness, Neoplatonists do exist, and they have to contend with this, as they will often hold these attributes about the gods. So, we're not out of the woods yet. But stuff like...
Okay, yeah, you can make the argument that there are certain faiths that contend that the gods collectively possess the omni properties. Fine, whatever.
This is largely where I do hold disagreement with Neoplatonism personally, so we should talk about it. So Christians, in my opinion, defeat the logical problem of evil fairly effectively by offering explanations of why God allows evil. These are called theodicies. A strong...
Which is a conjunctive word, a portmanteau, if you will, of theological idiocy. They're literally excuses. Why might God allow evil within the parameters of the problem of evil? Well, let's come up with an excuse and give it a fun philosophical sounding name.
Example of a theodicy, which in my opinion defeats the problem of evil, would be a greater good theodicy that shows that the existence of evil allows for a greater diversity of goodness. Without evil in the world, there is no chance for the kinds of good that manifest as responses to evil. Among them are things like mercy. In a world without evil, it is impossible to be merciful.
That's not necessarily true, because you can have suffering without evil. It's not important. It's not important. I find that particular argument, when it's in a bit more sophisticated form, somewhat compelling. You could say that the ultimate end is a greater good than would be achievable any other way. Like Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels famously posed, and other people have posed over the years, but Eric really comes to my attention for this one. Could God not kill children? Could God have flooded the earth and killed one less child? Because that God would be more moral than the God that this book describes. So if God is all powerful, could he have killed one less child and been a better divine being? The potential excuse that you could say all the children who died had to die, as tragic as it is, as much suffering as it caused, and so on and so forth, because the eventual end could only happen in the way that history actually follows. Every single person who dies tragic, horrific deaths has to die in the way they die and when they die, in order to cause events to continue in such a fashion that a certain predetermined end is achieved, and that is the only way to achieve that specific end. There's still a lot of pulling things out of your ass for that one, but there's some philosophical robustness to it.
For example, farts are evil, as they bring about significant suffering. And a world...
We're going with farts. Oh, okay. I mean, okay. Fine.
Without farts would be less evil than a world with farts. However,
I just can't. Because philosophers have this reputation of sniffing their own farts. And he's a philosopher going with farts. Why though?
God allows farts because it allows people to show mercy by not pointing it out when someone lets it rip at the dinner table. Thus, the existence of the evil of farts is justified, even though it brings about suffering. This extends to natural evils, not farts, but disasters. The charitable goodness that results from responding to such disasters would not be possible without the existence of such evils. As a result, the problem of evil may be valid in form, but it fails to take into account this theodicy. So the result...
Well, that doesn't necessarily follow. Like, for example, earlier today, Milo Rossi, Mini Minute Man, released a video on Pompeii. Because he believes there's reason to suspect that the date that's passed down to us from Pliny the Younger, August 24th of 79 AD, is incorrect through translation and transmission errors, perhaps. And which is, both fortunate and unfortunate because, as you may recall, August 24th is my birthday. So sharing the same birthday as the anniversary of the destruction of Pompeii and Herculaneum and all that is... been interesting. Granted, only history nerds ever notice, but details. In the story of Pompeii, which Milo goes into a little bit in his video, Pliny the Younger was a witness to the destruction of the island because he was visiting his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who was an admiral of the fleet. And when the eruption started, Pliny the Elder took the fleet to go try to rescue people and died from volcanic gases in the process. So this natural evil, the eruption of the volcano, created the opportunity for Pliny the Elder to show heroism and attempt to effect some good. But he didn't, because he died. If the point was to achieve heroism and effect some additional good in the world, and a god were in charge of it, then we might have expected heroic efforts like Pliny the Elder throughout all of history would work, regardless of whether physics has to be slightly altered or something, just a lucky breeze passes by or whatever, because the universe would want to reward that kind of heroism if that was the kind of greater good that was trying to be cultivated. And then humans would eventually, after generations in many of these stories, get the message that if you behave in a heroic fashion, the fates tend to look over you, and that would make its way into our culture and so on and so forth. But it just doesn't happen. Pliny the Elder died. Firemen today die. This greater good thing, it's demonstrably false.
Is the argument can be fairly easily shown as a failure. Now, another theodicy might be that God wishes for souls to have experiences so that their souls may develop. Souls that have experienced evil may become more developed than those who have not. And the justification for developing souls...
Well, that sounds like a design flaw to me. Like, if you're an all-powerful being capable of creating anything, and you create souls that have to be lightly tortured before they're ripe, why did you make them that way?
Could be any number of ideas, but we intuitively see biblical characters and characters in stories generally to be more compelling if they face significant challenges and overcome something, sometimes evil. Therefore, there is reason for God to allow evil to exist. And polytheists, namely Neoplatonists, but polytheists generally as well, could easily adapt these theodicies to our own purposes. The evidentiary problem of evil comes in when we look at those evils themselves. And this is where the strength of the problem of evil really shines. The question arises that if the universe we live in is the product of a perfect God, then the evil present in that universe should only be sufficient to meet the requirements of the theodicy. But there are times that we can put forward examples of...
If you have a perfect God, there shouldn't need to be theodicies, but also the God doesn't answer the requirements of the theodicy. The theodicy is an explanation for why the God is allowing evil at all. This is peak fart smelling, right? It's saying the reality filtered through the lens of my mythology has to meet the expectations of my ability to deduce conclusions. That's not how anything works.
Unnecessary evils, such as evils that are only experienced and never overcome, and which never receive a response. There are also natural evils, which would be seen as unnecessary, diseases which cause people to die in extreme pain, especially silent pain, seem like an unnecessary evil within any theodicy, and become difficult to explain as a result. An especially compelling example would be instances of the unnecessary suffering in the case of animals, which are not undergoing the soul development according to Christian theodicies. So the presence...
Well, we're not dealing with Christian theodicies, Mr. Keltoy. Perhaps Professor Keltoy. I don't actually know. Like, why do we keep drawing Christianity into it as sort of a foil, a deflection, if you will, from the polytheism that you're ostensibly apologizing for, and explaining specifically how atheist arguments against Christianity don't really work against polytheism, which is kind of self-evident. It's sort of like how firefighters use water on certain fires, but use CO2 foam on other ones because you need the right tool for the job. But that's several levels of digression. We'll just go on.
Of any suffering at all is unnecessary. Take, for example, a fawn dying alone in a forest fire. It is a natural event, witnessed by no human being, experienced by a conscious being that will not go to...
And now I think I see from whence cometh this video. This is sort of a roundabout response to Alex's criticism about natural evil, specifically animal suffering, because, you know, Alex cares very much about animals. And according to the Christians, the animals don't have souls, so why do they need to suffer if soul building is one of the reasons evil is allowed? But that's a whole lot of ifs. But that's Alex's preference for things. You know, I mean, I love animals too, but I wouldn't use them in this particular argument. I might go with the trees or the microbes or the human children who suffer, whether it's from earthquakes or floods or fires or volcanoes or other natural disasters, or who are eaten by animals or abused by pastors. Granted, that's not natural evil, unless you consider humans to be part of nature. But whatever. The divine beings are allowing quite a lot of evil to things that we definitely can empathize with. And if a child gets unalived by one of these evils, then it doesn't have the opportunity for its soul to grow and mature in response to the suffering, which is what the apologetic is about. You can't learn if you're dead, but what you can learn from is a super chat from Left-Handed Jedi, who sends $2. Thank you so much, Jedi, and says, speaking of the right tool for the job, God damn it. And if you want the right tool for the job, wink, wink, head on over to adamandeve.com, enter the code word Brenly at checkout for 50% off almost any one item, 6 free movies, 3 free gifts, and free shipping on the whole order. Once again, not sponsored. I just stole the whole entire ad because I think it's hilarious. And I will run it every single time someone pays me to. Because this is how I afford food. And I very much appreciate your super chats.
An afterlife, according to most monotheists, and yet incredible unnecessary suffering occurs. This example does not mean that God does not exist, but it certainly undermines the theodicies designed to defend the existence of evil, so the likelihood of the God these theodicies defend goes down significantly. Now, atheists might say that this increases the likelihood of atheism, but I don't think so. Perhaps it makes atheism more likely than this particular expression of monotheism, but polytheism expresses the strength of the various theistic arguments as we discussed in my previous video, and yet does not...
Well, we're quibbling over the relative strength of various theisms is kind of dodging the point. He's still mispresenting, malforming the question, if you will. He's saying, you know, is this increasing the probability of atheism? But that's not really what we're trying to do. We can't take a positive atheism is true position because it doesn't make any damn sense. You can say, I believe there are no gods, and you can stand by that, but you cannot say there are for sure no gods. Just, I'm not convinced. You know, it's just, it's so frustrating because you can't make a positive case for atheism. Atheism is the default position of not believing there's any gods. You know, as people do when they're not, as Michael Knowles pointed out, when you don't shove your religion down a child's throat, they won't just magically believe in your God or any God necessarily. When cultures start to discover new faiths, they tend to go with nature worship or animism or ancestor worship and that sort of thing. It's only later on when people try to build a god in order to say, hey, the magic man in the sky has demands, but he only talks to me, so you have to do what I say. No, you're not worshiping me, you're worshiping him, but you still have to do what I say, because I'm the prophet. I have the best hat. I suppose that makes me a prophet. Can one be both a goddess and a prophet at the same time? Let's find out. Make sure you're subscribed for more adventures like that. Meanwhile, Aaron, non sequitur, sends a super chat for $2 and says, hey, pretty. Hey. And that's all. And I appreciate that. Both the super chat and the sentiment. Thank you very much.
fall prey to the problem of evil, and therefore does not need theodicies, even if they might apply. The polytheist not only can take on all of these theodicies when discussing humanity's relationships with the gods, but also undermine the argument entirely. It is reasonable for the polytheist to say that we overcome obstacles as part of our relationships with the gods. Odin and Thor specifically are known among their adherents for forging strength as part of that reciprocity. And this
that's true. That's part of both versions of Norse theology as I understand it. The entire thing with the creation myth, the reason that Odin felt like he had to make war upon Ymir is because it is his very nature to have battle, to have conflict. And so conflicting with what was at the time all of reality itself, Ymir was reality at the time. That was just the expression of his divine nature for battle and conflict and growth through strife and struggle. That's the ultimate lesson of that particular myth, is that in order to create, you have to destroy. Now, that may sound familiar to you if you've ever seen The Fifth Element, because it's also Zorg's philosophy that destruction brings creation. The thing of it is, as evil as that sounds, it's true, but it's only half of the coin. To create also requires destruction, just like destruction brings creation. They're opposite sides of an equation. It's not one thing or the other, but both, and they have to be in balance. We know that from physics, right? Like if you burn a piece of wood, you get ash and smoke and light, which is energy, but it has to equal the total of the wood. You know, there's never mass magically appearing or energy lost. It just, we know from physics, we've proven it is always equal. So, you know, there's some science blending with philosophy for you.
Ties in with the existence of various evils, justifying that development because of the opportunity for honorable or good actions. Traditional polytheists also hold that the gods are not the only powerful agents, but that there are also malicious forces in the universe. Within heathenry, there are stories of Jotun, trolls, and other beings that bring great harm to the gods and to humanity. Consider the jaws of Aegir, bringing down ships in storms, putting Aegir in this space between devourer and deity. There are stories of the gods in struggle with each other. There are stories of kinds of gods engaging in destructive war against each other, such as the Aesir.
The thing with the gods warring with each other is always interesting to me. Like the apocalypse myth of Ragnarok. Like, you know, Tyr lost his hand by being too careless around Fenrir, and then Fenrir becomes part of the Ragnaroks. It's a whole thing. It's just fascinating how, like, the gods, as powerful as they are, they never seem to fucking learn. They can only follow their nature. Whereas humans have a nature. Sometimes it's warlike, sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it's thoughtful, philosophical, nurturing, all sorts of natures. But humans are capable of learning and doing better. And in that respect, and I believe this is the core of all the various polytheisms, that whether we're rediscovering or reconstructing or whatever the case may be, is to show that as scary and powerful as the gods are, they're like forces of nature because they're personifications of actual forces of nature, whereas humans can change our direction. And that, as weak as we are compared to, say, a hurricane or an earthquake, makes us, in a certain way, far more powerful than the gods. And another thing more powerful than the gods, that seems like a great place to put a pin in things. Misinterpretations sends a super chat for $4.99. Thank you so much. And says, and if you want to burn a piece of wood, head on over to adamandeve.com and enter the code word Brentley at checkout for 50% off almost any one item, 6 free movies, 3 free gifts, and free shipping on the whole order. That's adamandeve.com, code word Brentley. I think I've run that ad more than Brentley does, but that's okay. I do not mind at all. Thank you so much. And also a super chat for $20 from Miranda. Thank you. Who says, the more gods you claim to exist, the more gods you lack evidence for. Saying your gods aren't impossible isn't the same as giving evidence they exist. What we do have evidence for, the code Brentley can get you good stuff. I did not see that one coming. Well played. Well played. We're definitely hitting that ad more than Brentley does. Oh my goodness. That is trippy as hell. Oh, alrighty, folks. Yeah, we could go on, but it's almost time for Maya. So I'm just gonna start my wrap-up thing. First of all, thank you all so much for joining. It's always a pleasure hanging out with you folks. I tried to cover a lot today. I hope some of it made sense. Oh shoot, what have I done? Oh, now I'm tiny. This is not what I wanted. This is not, goodness. I'll get used to this eventually. It'll make sense someday, I promise. Yes. Thank you so much for coming. And we do have a lot going on. Java and Jugs returns tomorrow morning on the Damn Network or the Java and Jugs channel if you're subscribed there, and probably other channels. Because we do like to multi-stream that thing. That's one of the points of that thing. That'll be at 9 a.m. Eastern, and my regular morning show, Hot Topic, will also happen at 11 a.m. Eastern. Tomorrow we're talking about polyamory people and common misconceptions about poly, how poly differs from monogamy, what it feels like being a poly person trying to live in a monogamous world, all this sorts of stuff. And I have at least one video that we can look at how people think about these things if we need to. We'll see how it goes. It'll be fun though, because that's the point of those shows, is to have fun. I mean, I try to have fun here too, and hopefully you did tonight, but those are less serious. Deviant says, I thought Maya started 30 minutes ago. Doesn't she usually start at 9:30? I will take a quick peek. I will open an extra window. Normally, I wait until I'm sure Maya is on the air before I actually end the stream. Yeah, it's set for 9:30, but I will keep a window open so I can see and or hear it when it happens. But I digress. Lots going on. Double morning shows tomorrow. Hot Topic will be every day next week. I forget which show goes in which day, but we've got biblical dating, purity culture stuff, whole bunch of stuff. And then we've also got next week already scheduled out. Next Saturday, I will be over at Mark's Place for the debate review. Part 2 with the lovely Miss Bumblebee. We're covering Potholer 54's debate with one of the producers of Climate the Movie, which is a very flat earther vibes, that whole pseudoscience thing. So that's been a lot of fun so far. Sunday, back here for Ember in the evening. What the hell are we doing? I have it planned. Spooky places. Right. A while back, I picked up a book of the spookiest places. World's creepiest abandoned places. So we're going to look up a few of these and go exploring in internet fashion. That should be really, 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 really fun for the first weekend in October. although I think next weekend is actually the last weekend in September. But details. It's basically October. It'll be fine and it'll be fun. So I hope you join me then. And also, there's so much stuff going on. Good News has taken the normal slot over at Transpositions. That's, at least for the moment, airing at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Thursdays. We're still trying to set up the live news part of the show on a different day. Sports will be on Fridays, but Good News is in the normal slot for the time being. Plus, I may pop up at all kinds of places. Who the hell knows? But before we go, I do want to thank everybody who sent a super chat one more time, because I'm serious. That's literally how I pay for rent and food and things. And so I very, very much appreciate those. And you guys have been super generous today. So I want to make sure I touch on all of those. Mine a Finished Song sent 222 and said, if you want to slide from one thing to another, immediately with the innuendo. I'm not going to do the ad for every one of these because this is the replay. And it would take forever. Kelly King sent $4.99 and said, get your dose of Java and Jugs tomorrow. We have plenty of both to go around. Jester sent $2 and said, less judgment, more of what the jugs meant. Hell yeah. Left-Handed Jedi sent $5, thank you much, and said, on my flight to Ireland many moons ago, I ran across a guy that was researching whether the Oan markings on standing stones might be preserved songs. Jester sent $20 and said, anyway, Nil sacrificed themselves to create the creator gods, but the gods were lazy and only made Lisa. But Lisa wasn't made of sacrifice, so she couldn't be a creator god to do what she was asked to do. So she got frustrated and ate them. Deviant Outcast sent 200 Swedish krona, although I do like saying sex better. Fun fact, you can't be a Norse literalist because we weren't in historical times yet and didn't write down our myths. I mean, that is, if you take the word literally. What are we doing? I've confused myself. And then Deviant follows up with 100 Swedish krona and says, fun fact number 2, the area of Sweden I'm from and where I lived up until this year is the most runestone rich area in the world. They are everywhere. You're walking around somewhere, boom, runestone. Jester sent $5, thank you much, and said the safest assumption in the bad analogy is that it's the wild hunt and you need to get the fook indoors, which is good advice whenever you might hear random hoofbeats, because you never know. Left-Handed Jedi sends $2 and says, speaking of the right tool for the job, which I very much appreciate. Aaron Non Sequitur said, hey, pretty, that's all. Misinterpretation said $4.99 and said, and if you want to burn a piece of wood. And Miranda sent $20. Thank you. And said, the more gods you claim exist, the more gods you lack evidence for. Saying your gods aren't impossible isn't the same as giving any evidence they exist. What we do have evidence for, the code Brentley can get you good stuff. Hell yes. Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Now Maya's actually running, so we've gone a little bit over. So while I do appreciate the Cinder level members, I normally run the credits thanking them all. I try to do it on every show, but I want to get you guys over to Maya, so I will do the short outro today. As always, thank you so much. And do remember, you don't have to make philosophical theodicies about the evils of farts, because you are better than religion. Good night, and we'll see you in the morning.
Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No